So welcome back to another edition of the Common Constitutionalist video podcast. I'm starting to get a little bit used to doing these, and I'm actually kind of enjoying going out on location, although today, being a really nice day out here in New England, it was difficult to find a secluded spot. So here I am back at my son's college, and what a fitting location for this, what we're going to discuss today, which is from Ben Shapiro's Daily Wire, and it's actually from several sources, but it's regarding Ben Shapiro's speech at Berkeley, UC Berkeley, and how that went over, and the run-up to it, and a few other related items. So we'll talk about that today on the Common Constitutionalist.
You are listening?
No, you limey. They're not listening. They're watching.
The Common Constitutionalist, broadcasting from an undisclosed location, free from the prying eyes of establishment black helicopters.
Well, okay. So, conservative commentator, author, and all-around conservative and really smart guy, Ben Shapiro was finally given the opportunity to speak on campus at UC Berkeley a couple of days ago. And you may have already heard how it went down, whatever. But you would think the run-up to this thing, just like Ann Coulter's speech and just like Milo Yiannopoulos, or whatever the crap his name is, don't care for that guy personally, you would think that the outrage to the run-up to these speeches is like some sort of meteor strike on the earth, like some extinction level event or something like that, that it's just so overblown, it's just silly is what it is. So, but one thing that really stood out to him, and certainly to me, and probably to all of you, is the run-up to, during, and after his speech was an expensive and logistic nightmare. And it shouldn't have to be this way, but welcome to 21st century America, folks. And it was also one conservative could speak on an ultra-liberal college campus. Of course, that's redundant to call a college campus ultra-liberal, because about 60–70% of them are ultra-liberal, and then other than a few, the balance are just liberal. Whatever. Shapiro says it costs around $600,000. What's with the bells around here, man? I mean, am I being warned again? It was the bells, and then last week it was the trees that were falling in the woods, and I heard them. And now it's the daggum bells. I don't know what time it is, but the bells are ringing, brother. Oh, I know what it is. There is a wedding somewhere on the campus that's happening right now in a chapel. I'm guessing that the nuptials have just completed, and they're ringing the bells, overjoyed about that, I think. At any rate, we'll try and get through this. So, it costs around $600,000, $600K, for police to protect this one single event for one single guy. All right? It wasn't a gathering, a conservative think tank. It wasn't a gathering of conservatives. It wasn't a round table or a conservative conference that they were trying to hold. It was one dude trying to make one speech. That's it. Would you stop with the bells? We get it. They're married. Sheesh. Oh, heavens. And all this was necessary because of the, what we're now calling these guys cry bullies. They're not cry babies, and they're not the snowflakes. These are the cry bullies. And I think maybe Crowder penned that, or somebody at CR might have penned that, or started that, but we'll call them cry bullies because that's exactly what they are. Like Antifa and the groups like that. These types are not the snowflake types we're familiar with, requiring their safe spaces and all that. They want to shut down any dissenting viewpoint by any means necessary, including violence, and they got no problem with violence, either against property or people. It doesn't make any difference. They're angry and they're ignorant anarchists, and they just want to watch the world burn. That was from Alfred's speech in Batman, The Dark Knight, I think it was. Some people want to watch the world burn. At any rate, and they're looking for any excuse to light the match. It doesn't make any difference what it is, and something like this is a perfect excuse. Shapiro said, quote, "We've watched Antifa fight free speech in cities ranging from Portland to Seattle, from Sacramento to Dallas to Berkeley. We've been watching them get violent." They've been violent, Ben, but I agree. But the biggest problem by far has been the unwillingness of local authorities, and this is an important point, an unwillingness of local authorities to allow police to do what they need to do. Last night, hundreds of police were brought in to protect our event, one event, at a cost of $600,000. That's because of Black Bloc and Antifa. We'll get to Black Bloc in a second. But neither held sway because the police quickly arrested anyone with a weapon or a mask, and well, we'll get to that in a second, and prevented violence in the crowd outside. Good. Law and order is a precondition to a civil society. It's just sad so much law enforcement was necessary for a college speech. This is ridiculous. We're going to take a quick break where I'm just going to cut it, and then after the daggum bells stop ringing, it's like the Notre Dame, the Hunchback or something. Is the town on fire? What happened here? Outlaws coming. So we'll be right back after the bells cease to ring. Yeah, jeez. It's always something, ain't it? On location, what do you do? Okay, I think we're good. The bells have stopped. Whew. That went on for a while, I gotta tell you. Okay, so we're all familiar with Antifa, all right? The Antifa group, all right? Anti-fascists. They're pro-communist. That's all they are. They're a bunch of commie whatevers. And that's what they are. But they call themselves Antifa. Some may not be familiar with Black Bloc. Now, Black Bloc, some would think, and when I first heard about it a while back, I thought it had something to do with Black Lives Matter. Well, it doesn't. It's just another group of anarchists, basically. But the idea of Black Bloc originated where else? In Germany in the 1980s. It seems like all these radicals they always start in Germany. I don't know what it is about that place. Well, I kind of do. But at any rate, that's where we got socialism and whatever. But so they're named Black Bloc because they dress head to toe in black, and they wear black masks, and sometimes they wear those helmets, black helmets and whatnot. And they first appeared in America about 20 years ago to protest the Iraq War. And where, you might ask, did they first appear? San Francisco. Where else? They claim to be about protesters and protesting injustice, so to speak. But they're really just all about violence. It's the same way with Antifa. They're just all about the violence. They don't care about but like I said, the Alfred thing, they just want to watch the world burn. You know, and they want to be the cause of that. If you recall, the protesters that got violent and broke all the windows and basically remember they torched the limousine during Trump's inauguration thing, and they vandalized banks? Well, that wasn't Antifa, that was Black Bloc. That wasn't the occupation movement, that was Black Bloc. As a matter of fact, Occupy, you know, the Occupy Wall Street people, don't like these Antifa and Black Bloc people because they, the tendency is to think that they've aligned together, and the Occupy movement is trying to they're trying to give an aura of peacefulness, and these guys are upsetting the aura, so to speak. So they don't want anything to do with Antifa and Black Bloc, at least publicly they don't want anything to do with them. So anyway, they were also the ones that wreaked havoc at Berkeley prior to Milo Yiannopoulos' speech. That I don't think he was allowed to speak because his life had been threatened or something like that. So he ended up not speaking. And they probably did the same thing when Coulter went to speak there. So the Shapiro speech is what happens when the cops are actually allowed to do their job. It went off almost with virtually no problem at all. there were some protesters and whatnot, and there was some skirmishes that tried to happen outside, but like Shapiro said, the cops squashed it almost immediately. And so this is what happens when the cops are actually allowed to go out and do what they're paid to do, and do what they want to do, is uphold the law, all right, and keep people safe, keep the public safe. It's what happens when leftist political hacks don't step in and command that the cops stand down or stay off to the side and let them happen. Unlike Baltimore Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake, remember her? Yeah, well, I do. I didn't remember when it was, but I remembered her speech. And she said back in 2015 that after the violence over the Freddie Gray incident, quote, "I've made it clear that I work with police and instructed them to do everything that they could to make sure that the protesters were able to exercise their right to free speech." Sure. It's a very here we go. It's a very delicate balancing act, because while we tried to make sure that they were protected from the the protesters were protected from the people not protesting, protected from the cars and other things that were going on, and also remember, this was the punchline. This was the money quote of the whole thing for Stephanie Rawlings Blake and what got her in real hot water, and also gave those who wished to destroy a space to do so as well. Unquote. It's just really. So, just to contrast all the violence and nonsense that goes on when conservatives go to speak at college campuses and whatnot, let me contrast this real quick. Do you remember 24 September 2007? What were you doing? Where were you? I have no idea. And this is another one where I remembered the incident, but I didn't remember the year, and I wasn't sure of the college. But I certainly remembered the event. That was relatively monumental. And actually, you know what? Before we do that, let's take a quick break here, and we'll be right back to talk about the 2007 event, in contrast to all the violence that's happening when conservatives attempt to speak on college campuses. So we'll be right back.
You're watching the Common Constitutionalist video podcast.
Yeah, baby!
So, welcome back, and you are welcome, absolutely. So anyway, to recap, this was the Ben Shapiro speech at UC Berkeley that went off almost without a hitch. He had a really good time. We'll get to that also, and it was well worth seeing. If you haven't seen it, well worth listening to if you haven't listened to it. But there was some violence that kind of tried to crop up, and there's been a lot of violence prior to conservatives speaking on college campuses, particularly UC Berkeley and the more liberal college campuses, ultra-liberal college campuses. And so I decided that I would contrast the violence before, after, during, and whatever, when these conservatives speak, to an incident that happened, an event that happened where a speaker came to Columbia University on 24 September 2007. And who was that speaker? Well, it was the former Iranian president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, and he was allowed to speak at Columbia University. Remember, he had come over to America to speak at the UN. Of course, they love him. They love the Iranian radicals at the UN because they're all a bunch of freaking radicals. And then he was invited to speak at Columbia, Obama's alma mater. Ha! So anyway. And you know that there are rumors that Mahmoud Ahmadinejad is maybe planning to run for president again, and that would be fabulous because he's a firm believer in the Mahdi, the 12th Imam. You know, the guy that's the Imam that's hiding in the well, and in order to coax him out of the well, basically to save the world, which actually means to create a worldwide caliphate. That's what the 12th Imam or the Mahdi is supposed to do, but he's hiding in the well, and in order to bring him out, you must create Armageddon. And so that's what Mahmoud believes, and that's what he wants to do. And he really is a believer. Believe him, he is a believer. He doesn't just say this stuff. He's not like, you know, a politician like Chuck Schumer or Pelosi or one of these other nimrods that just say stuff and don't really mean it. Well, most of them, McConnell, Ryan, they're all the same. But Ahmadinejad, he means it. So he spoke at Columbia and challenged the university audience to look into, quote, who was truly involved in the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks? Who was truly, it was an inside job. Don't you remember Bush? Yeah, it was like Bush. But didn't he blow up the levees in New Orleans too, during Katrina? Bush and Cheney, didn't? I didn't know he was that bloody talented. But Bush is a special ops. He's a UDT, Navy SEAL. There you go. Who knew? And he also defended his right to question established Holocaust history, which means that Ahmadinejad doesn't believe there ever was a Holocaust, that it was just made up by the dirty Jews, and that denied there were gay Iranians. Basically, that it's just ridiculous. When pressed about the harsh treatment of women, homosexuals, and academics, and now this is at Columbia University, there was no violence leading up, there were no protests leading up, there were some boos and jeers and whatnot in the audience, but that was as much as it ever went. There were no shoes thrown or pies thrown or any other thing. There were no death threats to Ahmadinejad. That's not what happened. He was just allowed to come and speak because he's a radical jihadist, basically, and Columbia University, as long as it's got an R for radical, not an R for Republican, after the name, then you're welcome with open arms, I suppose. But at any rate, so Ahmadinejad painted a rosy picture of things in Iran, saying that women in Iran enjoy the highest levels of freedom. Unfortunately, he neglected to finish the sentence by adding that Iran offers the highest levels of freedom that Iran offers, which is about Zippo for women. But hey, you know, tomato, that type of thing. He elicited laughter and boos from the audience at Columbia, but that's all he elicited. There were no shouting, there was no, you know, the double middle finger, and no crying and weeping and gnashing of teeth, and no torched cars in the parking lot, and no chairs through the windows and all sorts of crap. None of that happened when terrorist Ahmadinejad came to speak at Columbia University. So anyway, he elicited laughter and boos from the audience in Columbia University when he said, in Iran we don't have homosexuals like in your country. But of course that's all, again, that's all he elicited, were just boos and hisses and jeers. But he's right about that. They don't really have public homosexuality in Iran because they wouldn't last the night if they came out of the closet, so to speak. So all you homosexuals, all you LGBT people and whatnot, you have no blanking clue how good you've got it in America, in good old free America. Go to Iran and claim your homosexuality, claim your transgendering or questioning or fluid or some other freaking thing. See how long you last. You wouldn't last 24 hours, trust me. So anyway, but that was it. It was just relative peace and calm, and that's all there was. There were no protests and whatnot after Ahmadinejad, and the reason is that there was relative peace and calm. Is that there's never a call to violence from us, from freedom-loving, peaceful Americans, the right wing, so to speak. Not the real right wing, not these white supremacist, neo-Nazi jackwagons, not those guys. The real right are us constitutional conservatives. We're also too busy making a living, paying our taxes, to support the Antifa and Black Bloc people that don't have jobs and just go around the country collecting their welfare checks and protesting everything. Whatever. And another reason why we don't protest and we don't beat people up and we don't trash cars and light them on fire and, you know, throw smoke bombs and who knows what else, feces bombs at counter protesters and whatnot. First off, usually we're not out there. If it is, it's just a peaceful protest, and if it started to get violent, we would just leave. That's the way we are. We respect the rights of individuals to speak, and also we respect other people's property, unlike these people, Black Bloc and Antifa. So I think the real takeaway from this entire event was that, given the chance to speak to an orderly group of students, Shapiro said that students can handle it. And they can. They were, if you saw the speech, everybody listened, they engaged. There were a few people that maybe were a little bit angry, but that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But all in all, it was according to Shapiro, it was a pretty successful event. And it turns out the students that attended really could handle what he had to say. They may not have agreed, but at least they could handle it without, whatever. Their heads didn't explode, and they didn't end up on the floor as a quivering mass of gelatin that needed a safe space. That didn't happen. He said, quote, "Yesterday we had a bunch of people who disagreed with me who attended the lecture." Now there were some people on Twitter that I saw that said that they needed some psychological counseling, but they didn't go to the lecture. Well, what the frick is that? You didn't even know what he was going to say. No, you thought you knew what he was going to say, so you needed psychological counseling. Give me a break. But apparently the people that went could handle this thing. That was great, and I personally thank them for their attendance. That apparently didn't stop a few feeling supremely hurt by things that they didn't have the stomach to hear, and that's understandable, of course. And we sometimes, people on the right, will do the same thing. They get angry over something that's said, whether just words, people. And that's to be expected, he says. He added, overall, though, and this is the key, I think, to this whole thing. This is the actual, I think, and he agrees, the real takeaway from this entire event that turned out not to be a debacle because of the humongous cost involved in keeping everybody down, so to speak, the ones that have wanted to cause violence. He added that overall, quote, overall, though, students are just fine. And all the administrative tut-tutting over the sensitivities of snowflakes is generally unnecessary, unquote. In other words, it's not as much the students who are driving this leftist outrage, it's the radical academics, the professors, and the school administrators. These 60s radicals that have grown up in the academic environment. They've never actually left school, and so they don't know anything about the real world, nor do they need to. And now they're professors and school administrators, and they're running these campuses, these 60s radicals. And that's who's driving this whole outrage. Students, if left to their own devices, without the influence of these academics, would probably at least listen peacefully and patiently to what people like Shapiro, me, and others have to say. But it's these administrators and these professors. Listen to some of these professors that are calling for the death of Trump. It's insanity. And that's what I mean. These people are the ones teaching your kid. This is where they learn it from. They don't grow up this way. They're learning it from their college professors and sometimes their high school teachers. So this is why Shapiro and others are making an effort to speak on campuses. The unfiltered conservative voice needs to be heard, and when you are able to connect with students without the leftist activist filter, real progress can be made. And that was the point of this whole thing. And it was a test, and it was a grand test, and it went off virtually without a hitch. When just the students are involved, unfiltered by the academics, unfiltered by the professors and the people that they hold in high regard, telling them how to think and feel and act, then they seem to be okay. At least they'll sit and listen. They may not agree, and they may get angry, and they may get sad, and they may want to eventually, maybe after the speech, they ran to a safe space, but that's okay. At least they came and they had the stones to sit there and listen. Because I guarantee you, if some of these leftists or liberals students that went to this event, it got out that they actually went, they would be ostracized by the radical left. I don't know. That's just my opinion. So that's all I've got today on a lovely summer day. Still summer, right? Yeah, for a week or so anyway. A few days. This is the Common Constitutionalist signing off. Thank you very much for watching. Those of you who did, those of you who don't, do. I'm out. See ya.